Welcome to Sales for Nerds. I'm your host and chief nerd, Ruben Swartz. If you started a business because you love serving clients but realized you didn't like the sales and marketing aspect of running that business so much, this is the podcast for you. Sales and marketing doesn't have to suck. It can actually be a lot of fun. And on this show, we're going to teach you how to connect instead of network, teach instead of market, help instead of sell, so you can keep serving people even while you're building your pipeline and growing your business. Now let's get to it. Welcome to Sales for Nerds, people. I'm super excited to have with me here today Meridith Grundei, speaking coach extraordinaire, and she is going to tell us how to talk to people better. You'd think after decades and decades of talking to people, we would know how to do this, but I am always amazed at how bad most people are at actually communicating with their fellow human beings. And while I like to think that I am somehow immune from this, I know there is still so much for me to learn. So Meridith, welcome to Sales for Nerds. I would ask you what you have in your glass, but I understand because you live in New York, you only have room for one bottle of wine and you already drank it yesterday.
Yes, thank you, Ruben, for pointing that out. I did. I had a bottle of wine yesterday and it's no longer here. However, I am very lucky because I literally live like 2 blocks away from a liquor store. So I can just, or they deliver too. I mean, I could call them while we're on this talk and they'll deliver me a bottle of wine.
I feel like that should be like, that could almost be a commercial for the liquor store right there.
It could be Cabrini wine or Vines on Pine. There you have it. They're brilliant.
Well, it's totally up to you, but I will say that I just opened this Chateau Frank Bigaroo
Ooh,
Saint-Emilion, and it is quite delicious, even though I am on medication, which makes everything taste a little bit metallic. So I don't have quite that sense that I usually get, but I can tell still very, very delicious and a great excuse to have a glass of wine with you on this lovely afternoon, Meredith. So
thank
tell
you.
me, how did you get into helping people speak better?
I learned how to speak first. It's the end of the day. Just kidding. No, I started off as a performer. So I was a dancer. I was actually quite shy as a kid. I was one of those kids that would just sit in the back row of the classroom because I didn't want the teacher to call on me because I hated being wrong, which I would imagine is a reason why a lot of people don't speak up, is they're either afraid of being wrong or not having the right answer or sounding stupid. You name it, that's enough for some people to just cower away and not use their voice. And that was me. And then I was asked by a dance instructor to say a few lines on stage along with all of the other kids that were in this dance that I was in. And from there, someone said, I really like your stage voice. You should take acting classes. And then one thing led to the next. I took acting classes. And what I loved about it is that I got a script. And so I got to use somebody else's words and I got to play a character. So it wasn't really, it was yes, me, but I had a character I got to play behind and act and take on those characteristics of. And because of that, and because of the repetition and the excitement of being in acting classes, I feel that it really built up my confidence as a speaker. And then I got into improv later on in life, taught for the Second City for 4 years, performed at IO in Chicago, have performed in other places like in Denver, and was on a college team. Like I loved improv. I was just kind of a total nerd about it. And improv, what I loved about it is that it helped me because I was making stuff up on the spot and being extemporaneous, is that I was forced to bring in my own point of view. And so because of that, I developed my confidence even more. And I've also learned that I will mess up and that's okay. And that I will learn from those mistakes, and or most people are very forgiving when I do mess up. And for the longest time, I was very hard on myself. I did not give myself grace. And so that is the journey that got me into now helping other people speak and share their stories on stages.
So if I can go back to the beginning, you didn't feel confident as Meredith, but you felt confident playing the part of somebody else. And then would it be
Mhm.
fair to say that doing that gave you the confidence to say, maybe I can do this as Meredith as well?
Yep. And I still work on it. I'm very active on social media. I do videos on TikTok. I have a successful following there. And I even notice, even today, Meredith, you could be a little bit more authentic there, or why are you so afraid to tell more story here? Or so I feel like it's always a work in progress.
And I think that that's such a great point. And what you said earlier about we're going to mess up.
Hmm.
I think so many people, one thing I notice is so many people are great, or at least they feel very comfortable talking to one other human being, or maybe a couple human beings that they know. But if you put them in front of a conference room, or heaven forbid, an auditorium or a stage with tons of people in an audience, suddenly they think it's totally different and they freeze up. And not only are they not polished like Steve Jobs or whomever they're thinking they're supposed to be, but they're actually way below their actual capability that you would have experienced 5 minutes earlier when you were just having a one-on-one chat with them.
Yes. Yeah. People become paralyzed. That fight or flight response to having all of those people staring at them is is overwhelming. It can be very, very overwhelming for people. Uh, I don't know if public speaking is the number one fear, and if it is more feared than death itself. We hear that often. I do recognize that it is a fear, however, but I do think the fear is more about what other people think about you, and if whether or not you're going to mess up in front of them. And that's the piece that people need to start getting over, and being more in the mindset of I'm here to actually add value and to give you a good time, to serve you, to share what I have to offer so that we can all rise together. If that's a very different mindset than looking out at an audience who's going to eat them alive.
Right. It's
Yeah.
like people get up there and they think they are playing some crazy piano concerto for the symphony, and they've got to hit all these crazy notes exactly right. People are not there for the piano concerto, right? They
No,
they want you to know what you're talking about, and they want you to have some coherent message to tell them, but they're not judging you on technical perfection, most likely. And they're certainly not doing it if they don't care about what you're saying.
exactly. Well, and that's the thing. You need to give them a reason to care, and you need to engage your audience. That's true. But if you mess up, if you're engaging with your audience and you're in a relationship with them and having a conversation with them and you mess up, they're not going to care.
Right.
Mm-mm.
That's part of human communication. And I have a feeling that a bunch of people listening right now are like, well, I never get up and speak. I'm not a speaker. That's totally fine. I have no desire to be. I want to be like Meredith, sitting in the back of the classroom with no one calling on me. So I'm going to stop listening right now. And my hypothesis that you can confirm or refute is that even if you're not a quote unquote speaker, these days we're all in front of a Zoom room or something equivalent, where a lot of these same, I don't know if I would call them rules, but same
Mhm.
principles apply, right? And we want to be able to communicate effectively with these folks. And it's not
Yes.
just the one other person. Is that fair?
I think it's completely fair. We're being called to be on camera all the time now. In the Zoom room, I think is a really great thing to be talking about too, because what I've noticed over time is that we've gotten very comfortable in these virtual spaces, and the way we're showing up is becoming very lazy. I will,
Like we're
I'm
just
going to be
sitting here
complete.
drinking our wine,
We're
having a
just drinking.
business
Well, you're making me
conversation.
a little jealous, Ruben, but I would say we forget that people are watching us when we're on virtual calls. We forget that when we have our cameras on, especially in networking rooms where, what's the point of going if you're going to have your camera off? So all of our cameras are on, but I will notice that people get pretty relaxed, and it's really difficult to tell if people are enjoying themselves or not. It's almost like, and I hate to say it, but everyone's got resting bitch face. Uh, and what you have to show, if you're going to show up to a networking event, please show up well lit, alert, nodding, acknowledging, so that the other people, either the person who's facilitating it or the other individuals that you're about to get thrown into a breakout room with, that you look alive and engaged. So those nonverbal cues, I'm looking, I'm watching you.
I have been making a point to exaggerate my nodding because I'm feeling like,
Yes.
if we're in a room together, I can be real subtle about it. But if there's like 20 of us and I have this little thumbnail and that poor speaker is wondering, is anyone paying attention? It's like,
Yes,
yeah.
I want room and I want you in my room. Yes, look like you're paying attention. It's one thing to be a great speaker and it's another thing to be a great audience member too.
And a lot of times those things kind of go together, right? If you have good
Yep.
energy, it flows all around and everyone's a lot happier. And I think that is one of the things that's really hard virtually. The energy doesn't flow as easily and it makes it easier for people to drop out. Or sometimes I have trouble distinguishing between the person who is typing away because they are bored or they're answering an email or they're so enraptured that they're doing the thing I asked them to do immediately.
Right. Yeah, it is hard to tell. It's hard. I try to tell people when I'm on a call, like especially one-on-one, I'll say, I'm taking notes. I just need you to know that that's what I'm doing because I'm listening to what you're saying. So they don't think I'm zoning out because
Right.
it is, they can't see below the screen, like what's going on.
Right. And we have some of that resting bitch face sometimes when we're intently note taking
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
because we're
And we
really trying to take good notes.
I know. And it's one thing like when you're in person, it's easy to project what someone might be thinking or feeling. And I always say to my clients, like, you never know what someone's experience is. You know, they could be sitting in the front row with sunglasses on and not, and it looks like maybe they're nodding off, or maybe they were just crying and they were in the car and they've had a really hard day and they couldn't get a doctor's appointment for their kid who is sick. And they're just, that has nothing to do with you. And it's similar in those Zoom rooms, but also I would say just slightly different because if everybody looks like that, which is what I'm seeing these days, then you're like, is my content not resonating with people?
Right.
Yeah.
Are they forced to be here to get some kind of like corporate checkbox ticked off? So, all right. So I think everyone hopefully I guess unfortunately understands what we're talking about, like the purgatory of the Zoom room and all that.
Yes.
What specifically should people be doing? And is it different if they're doing it virtually versus in person? How do we actually not only engage attention, but communicate ideas effectively from one skull to other people's skulls?
Well, if we're going to talk about, so do you want that in terms of how do we show up as presenters and facilitators or just in general?
Gosh, I'm clearly not even qualified to be asking the questions on this, let alone answering them. So let's start with the first part. We're presenting, we're facilitating, and then we'll move into more general.
Okay. Okay. For the virtual, I feel that what is needed and what helps is how do you engage with your audience from the very beginning? So, for example, I just facilitated a training this morning. I always like to start off with a question that's it's a presentation slide that I have up, but I'm speaking. I'm like, okay, what is one superpower you want to have as a public speaker by the end of this training? Please put your answer in the chat. And then I'll repeat it several times as people are coming in. And this was a large group of like 100 people. So people are coming in, I'm repeating it. I'm like, oh, well, what is your superpower you want to have? Please put it in the chat. And then what happens is people start putting their answers in the chat. And then I'm like, great. Now I get to repeat all of that back. Oh, you want to be better at virtual presenting. You want to engage your audience better. You want to, right. And then the other thing that starts to happen is not only do I get to know who's in my audience and what some of the goals are for the people that are in my audience, but now I get to see what the commonalities are in the audience. And so does everybody else. So now I can go as the participant. Oh, I don't feel so alone. Such and such person also just is terrified and has a lot of anxiety when they present and they want to overcome that by the end of this training. So then we get people immediately engaged. That also starts to set the tone for the rest of your presentation. Now you know there's going to probably be engagement throughout. So then take advantage of that. Find another place, maybe at a midway point where you engage your audience again. Maybe you ask another question. Maybe you're putting them in breakout rooms. Maybe there's lots of different things that we can be doing with our audiences to keep people engaged on Zoom. You have to on Zoom, on these virtual calls. Otherwise, you will lose your audience. There's too many distractions. Most of us have dual monitors. We have a phone, maybe an iPad. We have kids, dogs, cats, wine, all the things.
All the things. And what about in person? Can you just ask people to shout things out? Like, what are you hoping to
Yeah.
learn?
Look, I always say it's your party. Host the party you want to have. Create the experience you want your audience to have. There are no rules. The only rules we put on ourselves are the rules that we think we're supposed to be doing because we've been watching everybody else give a presentation. I just say break them a little bit. So, for example, I like to use that analogy, which is if I'm hosting a party, I get to choose if I want to have music playing. I get to choose if I need you to take your shoes off at the door. I get to choose to put a libation in your hand the second you walk through the door or not. I get to choose if there's appetizers, if there's going to be a live band. It's the same thing with your presentation. Go ahead, have some fun with it. How do you want people to feel? Engage with them. Ask them questions if you want. Somebody's going to be having people recite Taylor Swift lyrics that I just worked with, and then playing Taylor Swift at the end and walking off stage and hooting and hollering with their audience. Like, you get to do those things if that's what you want.
And that's going to be probably a lot more memorable than whatever the bullet points of the presentation might be that somebody could give the
Please.
similar thing, but without all the party. There would be no party. It would just be a boring presentation.
No, I mean, how would you like it if you went over to somebody's house for dinner and they handed you an agenda?
I'd feel like I was at a corporate presentation.
You're like, great. So
When
these are all the things we're doing tonight. Why couldn't you have just told me that?
Right. And what I want is exactly what you said. I didn't know I wanted it. I wanted to go to the presentation and feel like I'm at a party.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know that not all like I work with a lot of technical people. They have, or didactic presentations, and there's a lot of data points and so forth, but you can still get your audience involved in the conversation. It doesn't have to just be a one-sided conversation where you're regurgitating information.
Okay. So get people involved. And one thing I've noticed is if you can get those first few people to start either saying something or dropping something in the chat, then everyone else feels comfortable.
Yep.
But sometimes if everyone's like, oh, I don't want to be the first one, then you kind of get that awkward energy and you got to have some people ready to go. And sometimes I've even taken it to, oh, Meredith's here. Meredith will say something if I call her out specifically, right? And you can, if you've got those allies, if you will, or people that you know, to get the snowball going, then
Yep.
everyone else starts to feel more comfortable. Okay, so we've got interactivity. I think that's really important. I mean, I do not want to be sitting there just listening to somebody. My brain can't take it for very long unless it's an incredibly enrapturing presentation, and chances are that it's not. Just statistically, right? Because you've got, just say you have 100 people in a room, whether it's virtual or in person, there's no way it's going to be completely enrapturing for every single person in that room.
Truth. It's true. Well, and I think it's a good point, Ruben, because not everyone is going to resonate with your message. Doesn't matter. What matters is the few people that it does resonate with. And it might only be a few people, and that is okay.
All right.
Not everyone's going to like you.
Let's talk about now that we've got people shouting things out or dropping things in the chat, what do we do when we start sending information to the audience?
Tell stories. Don't make it about you. And be very clear with what your takeaways are. What is it that you need your audience to do? What are the key takeaways that lead to the objective, and what it is that you want your audience to do? Be very clear with your structure. I think a lot of people are not clear about what their message is and what their structure is. And so they meander. They get caught up in features, but they're not really solving a problem and giving those solutions. And so that's where I feel presentations fall flat. I don't need a sales pitch. I don't want a commercial. I want you to add value in my life, and I want you to share the solutions to the problem.
And it's funny you say that because I'm not a big fan of television, but I think 30-second commercials are some of the best content ever made by humans because they have to cram a whole story into 30
They
seconds.
do. They do.
Right. And so I know exactly what you're saying when you say we don't want a commercial, but you kind of do want a commercial, right? Like
Yeah, you just don't want to sit there and tell people like I don't it's less about the commercial piece. Yeah, I feel if it's successful and you can cram a story into 30 seconds, you're gold and you should be doing more social media videos. But what I do feel is what I notice is that just people get too caught up in all the details and the features and the things that like the programs and the titles of the programs. Like I'm just rattling off, rambling off right now some presentations that are kind of haunting the back of my head, but it's less about that. We don't care about those things. Like
right.
we don't care how many programs you have and all of the we just want to know, are you credible, and are you really truly that person who's going to be able to solve my problem, and do I like you? Like,
Right.
do I feel like I can trust you? So that's ultimately, Frances Fry is she's a leadership professor at Harvard University, and she writes a lot for the Harvard Business Review. And I saw her TED talk on the triangle of trust, and it's developed for leaders and how they work with their teams. And as a leader, in order to have a team that's going to trust you, you need to have three things, which is authenticity, empathy, and logic. And I feel like it's those three things are the same things you need in your communication, in your presentations, in anything that you do when you're trying to build trust with an audience. You need to bring who you are to the table. You need to have empathy by the ability to put yourself in the shoes of another, and then logic. But so many people get so stuck in logic.
Mm-hmm.
That's the whole presentation. And at the end of it, I don't know anything about you. And I don't believe that you've really shown up as your true self, because you think you're kind of showing up as this idea of who you think you should be showing up as.
Now, isn't there some like ancient Greek thing with like logos and pathos and something that's sort of like
Yeah,
along
the
those
art of
lines?
persuasion, Aristotle's art of persuasion is ethos, pathos, and logos. Very similar.
So, I mean, this stuff goes back a long, long way. It's not like some newfangled, oh, the latest
No.
fad in HBR. This is how humans kind of operate.
Yeah.
And I think as a technical person, something that I try to keep in mind is like if I'm trying to get data from one computer to another, I just like move the bits from one place to another. That's all that's required. But if I'm trying to get something from one human brain to another, you can't just move the bits.
No.
It doesn't
Mm.
work that way. You need the story.
Mm-hmm. Or that great analogy that's going to help people understand better how those bits work. Because they'll remember the story, they won't remember the bits.
Right. And if they remember the story, they can often fill in sort of the crucial parts of the bits
Yeah.
later.
Yeah. Exactly.
But
Exactly.
it's not going to work in reverse.
No, it will not. No,
So
it's the emotion piece. We have to have emotion.
we need to have conflict, right? Like there's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Could be in the
Mm-hmm.
future, could be in the past, could be both. Struggle, hero's journey, blah, 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 blah.
Yep. Yep. And you want to make your audience the hero of that story.
Very important point. Okay, so we've got a story. The audience can put themselves in the role of the hero. A lot of people, I think, say, okay, great. I've got all this stuff. I've got my slides. And then they get up there and they read their slides
You.
and everyone goes to sleep.
First of all, okay, here's what I'm going to say. Their slides should be the very last thing that you look at. The very last thing that you look at. And you should be asking yourself before you even select a slide. And I'm going to say visuals. Let's just call them visuals. Visuals or props, because props I see are very underused. Ask the question, are these needed? Do I need slides? Do I need visuals? Do I need props at all? And if the answer is yes, great, then what are they, how are they best supporting my message? Are they supporting those key takeaways? Are they supporting the story that I'm sharing at the beginning? And if not, then you don't need them.
And
You
it's
don't.
definitely not a question of, oh, I've got 30 slides. They all have 6 bullet points. Let me read them one by one until
No.
no one is left awake.
You should know your topic well enough to where if all of your tech failed you, you would still be able to deliver your presentation.
Can you say that again, just in case somebody was not paying attention?
In case their tech failed.
Yes.
Yeah. You should know your presentation so well that if all the tech failed, you'd still be able to deliver your presentation.
And
You are the expert.
I would go one step further and say that 98-ish plus percent of presentations would be better if your tech failed and you just got up there and told the story.
I agree 100%. Yeah, agreed.
Now, in terms of the actual, I'm standing, sitting, speaking, emoting, talking, making eye contact, like sort of the mechanics of it.
Yeah.
What should I be thinking about or not thinking about so I don't get so tripped up that I'm nervous about the wrong things, but I also don't make amateurish mistakes?
Uh, well, first of all, I would say have a pre-presentation ritual. What I mean by that is if you know you're someone who has a difficult time managing nerves and perhaps it feels more like anxiety, then find something that's going to help ground you beforehand. Just don't, get out of traffic and then rush in there and deliver your presentation, or you're scooting your kid out the door and you're stressed out because they're late now for school and now you're hopping on to your virtual presentation. Carve out intentionally some time so that you can ground yourself. This could even be, it doesn't have to be a presentation. Perhaps it's a sales call that's high stakes for you. Find some time to really anchor yourself. So there's ways that we can go about doing that. Breathing exercises, inhaling through the nose, exhaling through the mouth to help regulate that vagus nerve so that you can you're never going to get rid of the nerves. You're just managing that fight or flight response. Listening to your favorite music. I do push-ups before I go on stage and I count out loud so that I'm using my voice and my full body. Going into a
How many
bathroom,
push-ups do you do?
sometimes up to 35. I'll just count until I get really tired.
That's awesome.
It's awesome and it keeps me buff.
Yeah.
You can go in the bathroom and do power poses, which is like the Superman or Superwoman pose, or your arms up out. And the Amy Cuddy came up with that power pose. There's so many things you can do. So just make sure that you have carved out that time. The second thing I would say, repeat the question, Ruben. I feel like there was a lot and I just
No,
went off.
I think this is exactly it, right? Like, what are the
Okay,
things
good.
mechanically we're supposed to be doing? And then let's say we're up at the mic.
Yeah.
What should we be doing, not doing?
If there's a podium, please do not be standing behind it. That's one thing. If there's, and I've seen this a couple times, if there's a podium center stage, see if it can be moved to stage right. When I say stage right, that's you standing on stage and your right. It's your audience's left because people read left to right. So they usually put the podium on the left-hand side of the stage. So making sure that that's moved and out of the way and that you're not behind it. Being mindful that you don't gravitate towards the curtain so I'm going to just say upstage and downstage. And for those who aren't familiar with what those two terms mean, back in the day, stages used to be sloped, or raked. So the downstage is closest to the audience, upstage is furthest from the audience, just to help people out there. Don't hug the upstage curtain or screen because it feels safe for people. Also, beware of the podium to the right because I've noticed people will start gravitating towards that podium because unconsciously it's there and it looks safe, right? Because it's another object in the space. The strongest place you can be on stage is center, a little bit center and downstage. So you're still in the light. Okay. Now I know that in conference rooms and so forth, that's a little bit different. You want to make sure that you're not blocking the screen. You want to make sure you're in a place where everyone can see you. Give yourself permission to walk around the space if it feels good to do so, but using your space. And then when you do move with purpose. There's a reason why you've moved. You're not just moving for the sake of moving. but you're moving because there's a change of idea or thought. So being more intentional in those places as well, I feel is really important. If you get an opportunity to record yourself and you can see yourself, make sure that you are practicing standing up and not sitting down, especially if you're delivering a presentation standing up, because you'll notice that a lot of people will sway back and forth or pace back and forth. That's your body just trying to calm itself down because it's nervous. And so that's your unconscious way of doing that. I hope that those were some things to help people think about.
That's a great point about recording yourself, and it's just amazing what you can see. And you're like, oh my gosh, really? I
Yeah.
guess I do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now,
I wouldn't say practice in front of the mirror, though. Don't do that.
it's going to be distracting, right? You're going to be focused on two things at once. Now,
Yeah. And yeah.
that actually does bring me to my next question, which is I'm imagining that a lot of the problem people have is they don't practice. And so they go out there to the most important moment or one of the most important moments of their career and they haven't prepared. It would be like Steph Curry's going out there and like maybe hasn't touched a basketball in a year and thinks he's going to go win a championship, which just seems absurd. But people ask themselves to do that as speakers all the time. What kind of practice do you recommend? How much time should people allot for practice?
You should allot as much time as you possibly can for practice. I wish I had the special sauce number, but it's really more about it's about building your confidence. And I always say practice out loud. Don't just sit there and scroll on your screen and go through your slides. Be up on your feet, practicing out loud. I say do like at least 20 to 30 minutes of practicing it. Maybe you just chunk out your presentation depending on how long it is. But let's just say for this conversation, it's a 45-minute presentation. Chunk it out. Take the first 15 minutes of it or so, practice, and then go take a break. Because your brain, you don't want to exhaust yourself. Take a break for 10, 15 minutes. Go do something else. Relax. Come back. Practice that same 15 minutes again, then go to the second chunk and then practice that chunk and then give yourself another break. So don't feel like you have to eat the whole enchilada, if you will, in one sitting. You can chunk it out over time and you'll start to retain it. It'll start to become more integrated. So you have to trust that process. But I would give yourself at least a good week out before your presentation so you're not cramming in the last minute. And practice those transitions too between the slides. Really set your audience up for what they're about to see. Orient them to what they are seeing once that slide comes up. So you're not competing with the content on the slide, especially if it's a data slide. So getting really familiar with those things so that you're, again, giving your audience the best experience possible.
And it's interesting because at the beginning, we talked about the importance of story for the audience. Mm-hmm. And how they need story to retain and process the information. And as you're talking about practice, I think there's also a benefit for the speaker because if you're trying to memorize just a data dump, it's going to be next to impossible. But if you are telling a story, which presumably is something that you care very deeply about, that's going to be a lot easier and a lot more natural. And yes, you need to practice and fine tune some things. But it's not like, let me go memorize parts of the phone book.
No, it's not that. It's really just about getting super familiar. It's giving yourself structure. So, I still am an improviser, and improvisers aren't just making stuff up on the spot, just at random. There's a structure actually that we're given. So it's the same thing for you. You have a structure and you're just practicing with that structure. You know what your points are so that you can get up on that stage and feel confident giving it. But if you don't have a structure and you don't practice that structure, then it's going to be very difficult for you to have those really authentic moments that you're being called to have with the audience. Like it's really difficult to interact and engage with your audience when you don't know what you're going to say next.
Right.
Yeah.
You can't be fully present. You can't answer the questions and so on. And I guess that brings me to wrapping up the presentation where presumably you are not just there as entertainment, you were there in a corporate setting to get the audience to do something different.
Mm-hmm.
Any tips on that call to action or how to send the audience away thinking not just, wow, Meridith was awesome, she was really entertaining, but now I'm going to go do the thing that I just invested in an hour of my life in hearing Meridith tell me to do?
Call to actions are tricky. I feel that the more simple you can be with your call to action, the better. It's really being clear about what it is that you want them to do next. So if it's you want them to get on your calendar, then you need to be explicit about that. Please find 30 minutes on my calendar. Here's the QR code that will take you directly to my calendar. I'll give you a moment to pull out your phones.
And
Let
that
the
seems like
silence. Yeah.
that's a
Go ahead.
reasonable ask, right? Versus because what oftentimes people want is they're like, and then I want them to write me a check for $600,000. Why aren't they
Yeah.
doing that? Right.
Yeah.
And it's
Or
not realistic.
it's not realistic. Just give them one action to take. So I've also watched presentations where it's like, oh, you can follow me on LinkedIn, and I've got this other training here, and I've got this, like, oh, can you also get, here's my calendar link. It's too much. Like, you have to just give them one thing. uh, there's a great resource called Talkadot that I now use because it's one QR code. I give them a code that once they get in there, they can use to get a free download if they want. But it's a survey for me. I get direct feedback and it collects all of their data. So they can opt into my email address. They can give me a referral. They can, right, give me a hot lead. It's great. That's my call to action. It's one QR code. I give them time and space to do it. That's the other thing, is that people don't give enough time for people to actually scan the QR code. So that's important too. Yeah. So I just say be very clear.
Be clear, be simple, give them space, and have it be something that's in their interest to do.
Yes. Yes. 100%. 100%. Uh, the other thing I would say too that I have seen often is people will do their Q&A. So they'll have their presentation, then they'll move into Q&A, and then they allow the Q&A to just fizzle out, and then that's it. It's like it's like build, and it just flops. So I say be intentional as well about that Q&A portion, which is have your presentation, open it up to Q&A, but then close the Q&A, tie back in maybe something that you said at the beginning of your presentation, whether that be something from the story you told, or maybe you want to share the 3 key takeaways again with them, and then go into that call to action. And then you can conclude with a very simple thank you.
So end succinctly, everything coherent, not just like, okay, I guess we're done with questions. See y'all later.
Yeah, and thank you so much for being here. Thanks for coming to my presentation. Like, yeah, no.
Well, Meredith, thanks for coming to my podcast.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's been such a pleasure, and I think everything you're saying is. I mean, I mean this with the utmost respect. There's no rocket science here, right? Like we're not doing anything quantum mechanical,
Nope.
but it is so important. And my day would be so much better if everyone I interacted with you could listen to this episode and follow your advice. Like I would just be so much more entertained, and I would learn more, and I would be less distracted, and it would be awesome.
Yes, thank you. Well, hopefully the listeners will take away a few nuggets of gold. And anyone who is listening to this podcast, if you want to reach out to me, I am more than happy to give you more resources.
Well, that's my last question is always, where can people find you?
People can find me on LinkedIn. And if you happen to be on TikTok, you can find me there at Grundei Coaching.
All right. We'll have links to all that in the show notes, of course. So if you are cruising around on your bicycle or jogging or skiing or whatever it is you're doing, check the show notes for all those links. Meredith, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Drop an iTunes review or a review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you've got a friend who would benefit from this episode,